be curious, and then look for the deeper underlying principle of the why.
Well, thank you for tuning in to today's Land and Everything Else podcast. It's Dr. Craig Lemoyne. I'm here with Philip Wegman with Emberwood Capital Partners. Philip, thank you so much for meeting with us today.
Glad to be here.
Why don't you share a little about what you do?
Yeah, so I am currently a service advisor here, and how we've got it built out at Emberwood is we've got currently 2 teams, and those 2 teams consist of 4 individuals. So we've got a client service associate, it's kind of a front desk, paperwork type person, then a service advisor. So a lot of my duties really are helping prepare agendas for advisor meetings, helping make sure that Right Capital, our financial planning system, looks good, updating Lista Plan, our tax planning system throughout the year, basically helping make so that when the advisor walks into the client meeting, they're ready to go, helping answer client emails as is appropriate, helping place trades, rebalance portfolios. So that's my role. And then there is a lead advisor and a senior lead advisor. So it's a lot of supporting them. And then also, as I've moved up here, I do lead at least 20 household relationships, just as they're preparing me to try and start thinking about becoming a lead or a senior lead advisor.
Sure. So you're taking a step to lead advisor, which is just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, share a little bit about your background with us, because I know it's kind of fun.
Yeah. So I grew up in Taylor, Missouri. So it's a small town, farming community, definitely, right across the river. Grew up on the Mississippi, right next to Illinois. And I went to college at Kansas State University. I graduated from their personal financial planning program.
Fantastic program, by the way.
Fantastic.
I do. I have a lot of friends there.
Yeah.
It's a great program.
It really helped set me up for success. I did an internship in St. Louis, and as I was going into my senior years, kind of trying to think about where I wanted to work next, and I got an email from Vanguard and their financial advisor development program. So I applied for that out in Phoenix, Arizona, and got through the interview. So I got to work out there. COVID hit when I graduated, because I graduated in May of 2020. And so I went out there and I worked remote for basically my whole time I was out there.
Yeah.
It was a very, very good learning experience.
Sure. Yeah.
It was incredible. They have incredible training. I just feel very fortunate, and even them helping, obviously they're Vanguard, but them definitely helping develop my investment philosophy. Then after I was there for about 2.5 years, I got engaged, and my wife runs and owns 2 brick and mortar coffee shops and 2 mobile units, coffee in Central Illinois. So I moved back, and when I moved back, I actually had met one of the partners here, Garrick, at a FPA conference in Minneapolis, and it was a completely random.
Oh, hey, I was at that one.
Yeah,
that was a good time.
Yeah. It was completely random. It was like a networking event.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this little town where I'm from. You wouldn't know it. He pulls out his business card. I see Quincy, Illinois. I'm
and you're
what the world?
What's happening?
Yeah. So we'd been in contact, and I basically reached out to him and said, hey, I'm going to be back in the area. I'm not going to be living in Quincy, once we get married, but would be willing and open to if you guys got something flexible. So they made something work. I work remote most of the time. I come down to Quincy about every other week for a couple days. And then I started here and just started, right into the service advisor role, which has been really good. And so just been working up through there. And then also here I'm on our investment committee as well.
Well, and I think that's a good story. And I think it's a story that's somewhat universal from the standpoint of most financial advisors in their 20s probably had similar elements to that stories. And by the way, that's a lot of financial advisors.
Yeah.
So, you've got, a financial planning program as opposed to transferring in from another job.
Yeah.
You've got some experience at a very well-known, mutual fund investment company.
Yeah.
And now here you are working with customers, client-facing, owning some relationships. I mean, if I were to map out how to have a good career so far, I'm pretty sure that would be the map.
Yeah.
You're following it exactly. So that's fantastic. But kind of let's jump in then. So, you do a lot of the quant, and I vaguely remember being in your shoes a decade or two ago, right? I would say at that time I was probably a lot sharper than I am now when it comes to just
Sure.
the volume of plans that you do,
Right.
and the numbers you see, and you're implementing the strategies, and then they're being carried out, of course, by those senior advisors, but you're the one putting it all together.
Right.
So, I mean, that kind of means, when I'm getting at quant wise, you're kind of at the top of your game. And
Sure.
maybe for another 5 or 10 years, and then it becomes more handshakes and personal, and
Yeah.
it changes a little bit what you do. So from that quant end of things, let's start with software conversation. I've found when we're looking at things like Right Capital or Money Guide or what used to be Navaplan or whatever we call it now, it's very easy to model things like stocks and bonds and mutual funds.
Yeah.
Right? They're integrated. You can plug in. What starts happening when you get to things like land or real estate? Like walk me through that and challenges you see in modeling that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It definitely can be very challenging. So I sometimes hate saying it goes back to the client because I feel like that's sometimes a cop out of not actually providing information that's helpful. It does go back to the client. I mean, sometimes depending, right? Some clients maybe have an idea of, well, sorry, I should back up. So in Right Capital, there is definitely a place to enter in things like land and real estate. I would say those are probably two of the most common, and then a small business.
Okay.
I feel like there's some fairly robust abilities to add in those things. You can customize your growth rate. You can customize if there's cash that's paying out, right? Distribution rates on things like that. You can basically go in and kind of give it whatever return you think is appropriate. And part of the conversation, even with alts, really is about talking to a client and helping them understand alts are great, but how do you turn that into income for retirement? If that's what we're needing to be talking about, more of the retirement piece, right? Because some people have enough money that you're not really talking about retirement.
Right.
That's kind of a given. Then other people, I would say, especially farmers, right? They're coming in, they've got a ton of, my grandpa would say, who's a farmer, they're land rich and money poor.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay, you've got all these assets, but how do you actually turn them into cash?
Retirement?
And that's not an answer, but that's kind of where I would start, is really saying, hey, if you want to retire, how do we make this happen? And if you want to keep the land, how can you make that work? So it does go back to them, but it is trying to present and say, hey, here's some ideas about what land maybe has done over the last 100 years. Okay, what if it's a little bit more? What if it's a little bit less? What if you can cash rent it? And then for real estate too, okay, just looking at the area, maybe what's been your return? What are you getting paid out on the property? And then you can run several different scenarios about, okay, what if we sold the property? What if we sold the land? What if we kept it? What does that do to your chances of success?
And I think that's kind of the key quant piece of working with alts. Do you see the same if you, when you're kind of in that private equity hedge fund space, if that space shows up a lot? I mean, is that kind of the same or different? How software might handle that?
How the software might handle that?
Yeah.
I haven't had as much experience in putting that information. I mean, I'm just talking off the top of my head. If I were going to be doing something, I probably would model it closer to like a large cap growth company, just because those have done so well over the last years. And then the model, because it's backward looking, is going to say that it's going to
pick up more history.
Yeah,
I mean, because your entire Monte Carlo and probability simulations do need a bit of a track record to work, to that end. Well, that's kind of neat. And when we get to your role here, you mentioned the investment committee. Why do you want me through? How does the investment committee look at? Is this a good idea, bad idea? What's the process? Not necessarily the outcome, but like what processes do y'all go through when you're evaluating public market equities to anything more exotic?
Okay, so even a broad scale.
Just kind of an idea of that process.
Obviously we look at the research. Vanguard does a lot of great research. Universities are doing great research. That would be one of the things we look at. We do look at information provided by different, investment companies. So, I mean, buyer beware, right? Obviously, they're going to try and put out stuff that makes their stuff look good. But that's, those are ways that we evaluate and determine. I mean, we're looking at standard deviations. Obviously, we're looking at history, track record. That's even one of the things I'm really appreciative about at Vanguard, and a lot of people think of Vanguard as, oh, they're passive.
Yes.
Well, they started at their first fund, and the history is a little bit hazy on this, but like way back when the 1920s was like an actively managed fund. I think it's their Windsor fund or something like that. So they are an active manager, and they actually have a fair amount of actively managed funds. One of the things that they talked about, and they were even rolling it out to the personal advisor service about the time I was leaving. But one of the things they talk about when you're looking and trying to determine more actively managed is really, okay, history, right? That's a big one.
Sure.
Right. How long have you been doing it? And then also your costs, right? That's a big one.
I think cost is, when I think of Vanguard, I think of low cost,
Yeah.
right? I think here's the company that said, we're not going to do that for a low commission.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And
more so than I think passive.
Yeah.
I think we're going to cut that piece out.
Yeah. I think that is a fair statement. Yeah.
So the investment company, you're looking at research, the investment committee, you're looking at research, you're looking at alternatives, options. Yeah. So do you wind up kind of in a model portfolio situation? Is that the outcome, or?
I would say you end up in a model portfolio situation most of the time. And part of that is because if you're thinking about a financial planning firm,
right.
I mean, one of the things you do have to think about is scale.
Of course.
As well as, guess what? Like, sometimes when clients come in and they're looking for maybe more of that private equity thing, but I don't want to put a dollar amount on it, but it's kind of, you have a small enough portfolio that's not the problem.
Right.
I almost think of it like nutrition or health, right? You can kind of have all these great fun ideas about how to get more healthy, and at the end of the day, you got to think about what you eat and you got to exercise.
Well, I agree entirely.
Yeah.
And my take is, when we start looking at illiquid investments, we really want to make sure they've got enough liquid ones to make it work.
Yes.
Right. So I've seen the movement of alts from institutional down, but I still think if the question is, can I retire? It's probably not the time. Right. Instead of, how much legacy do I leave my children? Right. Now that framework, you see things like real estate, land, private equity working better than, can we retire? When can we retire? I think that if those are the questions we're asking, I'm not entirely sure something the liquid's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Liquidity is a big part of it.
So when you look at your career, where you are, so you get out, I imagine licensing comes first most of the time.
Yep.
Then what?
What comes after the licensing?
So you're licensed. Now what, talk to the students listening in right now. Like what comes after licensing?
Yeah. I mean, so if I'm thinking about licensing, I'm thinking about your continuing education.
Sure.
I mean, I'm a CFP, so
credentials come next.
I think credentials come next.
Yeah. Did you get your CFP? Like, did you get it right after all the series stuff? Or
yes, I did. So that was one of the other things that's really amazing about Vanguard's curriculum is I did the SIE, the 66, and the 7.
Okay.
And I got those all done, and they give you time to study for those. Yeah. And so I got all those done a couple months after I joined. So I joined in May, and then because I was part of the financial advisor development program, I got to study for the CFP from September to like October or something like that. So yeah, I think CFP. Yeah, I got the CFP at Vanguard, and it was. I mean, I think it's great.
So you've got CFP, you've got CE licenses. Is there anything else on the horizon for you?
Yeah. So I also am an enrolled agent.
Okay.
So it just means I know a little
that's
bit more.
fantastic.
Yeah. And if someone is sitting there and they've got their CFP and they're thinking, what's the next thing? I would highly recommend doing the enrolled agent. It's a low, from a designation standpoint, it's a low cost. I think I got some study books that are about $40 a month, like study software. And then the exams are maybe $100-$200 every time. And as far as licensing stuff goes,
that's not
cheap.
bad. And when you look at enrolled agent, from your role right now, doing a lot of the quant work, I can, share a little bit what enrolled agent is. And we have some folks listening that don't know.
Yeah, an enrolled agent is, from my remembrance, is basically the only designation the IRS actually gives. The way I describe it to people, it means I know a little bit more about taxes than the next guy. We have some tax firms here in town where the accountants only have their enrolled agent designation. So I'm not saying that that's who you should go out and get. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying that it provides me a certain level of expertise when it comes to taxes.
Well, and I think from the role you're doing right now, tax specialization is worth its weight in gold, right? Because understanding, one of the great retirement struggles that I love to see that tech has come a long way, right? Is that not necessarily, we're talking, I'm 65, I'm 67, I'm somewhere in there. I'm done with working. It's time for retirement, right? Great.
Yeah.
And we can look, and we can even use Excel, and we can say, you have X dollars, you need Y cash. We can make it work, right? But what bucket do I pull out of? How much of each bucket do I pull out of? What are the consequences of pulling out of each bucket? And, how should I be converting into Roth while I go? That's where I think Enrolled Agent gives you that extra edge of those conversations. And back to alts for a minute, when we're looking at land, real estate, tax depreciation, we're looking at passive income, passive losses. I think all of a sudden that Enrolled Agent is like critical, right? Because all of a sudden you're like, I need to get my game better.
Yeah, for sure.
So I see that worth its weight in gold on a path. And to that end, I'm kind of curious about paths from your perspective, because if you listen to the episode with your partner, he and I afterwards talked about career paths. What kind of, you've got folks listening to this podcast that own firms, you've got folks in your role somewhere in the middle. How important is a career path in a firm to you?
I mean, it's very important. And one of the things, you don't have to spend a lot of time in the financial planning world to hear of a lot of promises and a lot of broken
It's true.
promises.
Yeah.
Broken dreams, right? Oh, you come work for me in a year or two, you'll take over the book.
Oh, yeah.
And it's 5 years down the road and you're still saying, hey, what about? And there's so many reasons why it's difficult for someone to transfer their book on or bring someone up. So I think it's critical, because otherwise you're kind of just relying, if you're going and looking at a firm and they don't have a career path, you're kind of just relying on their word.
Right.
And not to throw firm owners under a bus, guess what? They're really busy.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to do the job of lead advisor, and they're also they're also running their business
as a partner. Yeah.
And so it's crucial, and it doesn't even need to be much, but it really is about, hey, do we have something in writing? So that also in 2 or 3 years, I'm not coming to the table and saying, hey, you promised X. And they're like, I never said that.
Right.
I said Y. And so it can really help set expectations appropriately.
I mean, I think to some extent, of course, compensation is important, because we all want to be rewarded for our time, and altruism only goes so far. We all have families and, responsibilities. But I do think that extra encouragement, right, for you to burn the midnight oil from time to time, or make sure you're here at 7 with coffee for that early client meeting,
Right.
like, I think those things are almost purely driven by my long-term belief that me investing my time in this firm will have an outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And an extra $5,000 a year doesn't get that same result.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing I've noticed with career paths and firms. The ones that have pretty solid career paths and can articulate them, it's one thing, and the others are like, well, here's an extra 3,000 or 5,000. And
right.
You're like, yeah, I'm going to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a different model.
And it's because you can see, it's essentially almost like, we're going back to investments. It's almost like you running out that long-term return, and basically like, hey, with a career path, you can kind of see, oh, okay, if I put in the work here, I'll be here, I'll be here. Right. As opposed to like, well, it's kind of like having an alt that just kind of pays you income every year.
Yeah.
And you're a little bit like,
it's
hasn't grown ever.
It's
but
entirely the same.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. And you're eventually going to be like, I don't know if this is going to keep up.
That's a great analogy. I love it. All right. So walk me through, like what advice do you give? I'm 22. I'm graduating. Maybe I have a financial planning degree. Maybe I have something tangent.
Okay.
What advice do you give that person? Hit the ground running with me. What kind of, what's next? Hard work ethic? Like, what do you got? For
So you're, let's say they're in a firm. Would that be sure?
Let's say they've entered the job market.
They've entered the job market and they're in financial planning as well. Okay. So one of the things that's been definitely something that's very powerful for me, first of all, I just love this job as far as financial planning. Like, it's my passion. We're talking about my brothers earlier. They get tired of me talking about it. Like, I truly love what I do. I'm also curious. And I think that those two things really help. So if someone is in financial planning and they are curious, I think that that's a big, big lift, because every time you're going to come up to a problem or some issue, they're not just going to look for the answer, but they're going to look for the why behind the answer. So that's what I would give someone if they're just getting into the industry. Like, okay, but don't just try and find the answer for the test. Actually understand why, understand the principle of the financial planning topic. So instead of saying like, well, I know for a Roth conversion, we should do $10,000 a year just because that's what Holistic Plan spit out or whatever. No, the deeper underlying principle is for taxes, it's always better if you can decide when you pay taxes than the government decides when you can pay taxes.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I would say is be curious and then look for the deeper underlying principle of the why.
I love that. And one more question for you. We talked earlier about like some flexibility, right? Where some days you're spending remote and some days you're spending in the office.
Yeah.
How have you made that work? Because I think that can be hard for some people in their 20s. Like they love the idea of it, but the execution can be really tough. How have you made it work?
I'll say one of the other, Vanguard has been so great for my career. I had to learn when I started at Vanguard.
Okay.
Because we were completely remote. So that's one aspect of it. Another is, so if I'm talking about very practical advice.
Yeah.
I set a timer.
I love it.
And so I basically work for 50 minutes and take a 10-minute break. So when I'm working remote at home, I set my timer. And normally throughout the day, it kind of derails, but that's not the point. To start out, I set a timer and I work for 50 minutes. And then I take a 10-minute break where I try not to be on my phone. I get up, I walk around. Because when you're in the office, it just kind of naturally happens that way. Another very practical thing is I've got Do Not Disturb on my phone. And I only let calls through for basically my wife and work.
Okay.
And no other notifications
No,
pop up.
I think that's genius.
And then the last thing, and I haven't done this as much recently because I've been using more Do Not Disturb, but you can also, there's a setting on iPhones where you basically can set your screen to black and white.
Okay.
And it turns out it's way less interesting to be on your phone when it's black and white.
So you're gamifying a little, you're ungamifying.
Sure.
Let me rephrase that. You're ungamifying.
So as far as those are things that I think are helpful, because I think when someone says, I just have a hard time doing it, well, kind of like, what are your distractions? As well as you've just got to like reward yourself sometimes. And that's where the 50 minutes and 10 minutes can be really beneficial, is refreshes me. But then also when I'm working, I need to be only working. So I think all of those things can really help avoid distraction and make sure I'm disciplined.
And I think there's one thing you said in that I want to hit home on, right? Every day you're starting with a structure. You're saying, I know this might derail, but you know what? We're starting with the structure.
Yeah.
We're going to start strong. And I think that reset every day is resilience. I think resilience is very important to get that to work, right? Because you're saying, no, yesterday, total chaos, crazy day, 7:00, I'm replying to some emails, don't really know how that happened. Nope, 8:00, we're starting the next day, right? Yep. I like that. That resilience is key. And I like the structure, distractions. I think that's so important because you see a disconnect, and you're of a group of people that COVID just destroyed your college a little bit at the end there, right? And so, I mean, in a way, that's like a cohort builder, right?
Right.
Not the best
That's
one,
true.
but it
That's
sure
true.
is one,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You got like 4 years of financial advisors in there that understand.
Right.
But we will have students graduate from our program and they've got these sort of remote hybrid things, and then they don't really work out. And I think a lot of it is resilience, and then what you've shared that you do makes it help.
One of the other thing I'll also add, when you are starting in a remote position, especially if maybe other parts of your team are together, just over communicate at the beginning so that they're not checking on you and sending you a message and they're starting to think, wait, why isn't he not responding? What's taking so long? So if you need to step away, like you would leave the office here even to go run an errand or something like that. I'm not telling you to do that, but like,
No,
you
yeah.
need to step away, use the restroom. Well, people see that happen in the office. Just message out and a little over communicate when you start and build trust. And then it turns out that people start caring a whole lot less about like, wait, Philip hasn't responded to my thing right away, because they're seeing I'm getting stuff done.
I think that's wonderful advice. But Philip, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. And we're going to not only have it on the podcast, we'll probably play some in our class too. So thank you.
Thank you.